Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be exploring poetry identity and finding your voice even when you feel invisible.
Okay.
Our source material today is really fascinating. We're diving into two poems and some personal reflections from Jaime Hoerricks, PhD, an autistic trans woman.
Okay.
And she shared all this in her newsletter, episode 66.
Hmm.
And I have to say, it really got me thinking.
Poetry can be such a powerful tool for self-discovery, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And what's so interesting is Jamie discovered this new way of expressing herself through poetry after she started hormone replacement therapy.
Oh, wow.
She even mentions that these bursts of creativity were often triggered by nocturnal panic attacks. It's almost like she found this way to channel that intense energy into something beautiful and meaningful.
That's quite a transformation.
Yeah.
Speaking of transformations, her poem Unseen Steps really struck a chord with me.
Mm.
The imagery of vanishing, the absence of mirrors, becoming a shadow, it's so evocative. And then there's that line, "To step into my shoes is to step into the void, to walk the corridors of erased stories and feel your own edges blur."
Wow.
It really makes you think about how society often overlooks or even erases certain identities.
That line gave me chills. It's like she's saying that even trying to understand her experience is like stepping into nothingness, a place where stories have been erased.
Hmm.
It makes you wonder, have you ever felt that way? Like your story wasn't being heard or acknowledged?
It's a feeling many of us can relate to on some level.
Yeah.
Now, shifting gears a bit, Jamie's other poem, Beyond Two Sigma, takes a different approach.
Okay.
It starts with this anecdote about her teaching statistics and using herself as a walking, talking lesson on deviation.
Right.
She talks about how even when it came to finding clothes that fit, she was always an outlier.
You know, when she talks about being beyond two sigma, it really challenges that whole idea of what's considered normal, doesn't it? It's like she's reclaiming that space outside the bell curve and saying, hey, there's power in being different. What are your thoughts on that?
I find that incredibly empowering. Instead of seeing being far from the average as a negative,
Yeah.
she reframes it as a space of possibility.
Right.
That's like those powerful lines from the poem. This distance is not emptiness. It is possibility. It is where imaginary numbers sing and quantum leaps are born.
How about the way she brings in quantum theory? What do you make of that comparison? For anyone listening who might not be familiar, quantum theory basically challenges our everyday understanding of how the world works, especially when you get down to the tiniest particles.
That's a great point. Not everyone may be a physics buff,
Right.
but I think the core idea she's getting at is that just like in quantum theory where things get strange and unpredictable at the subatomic level, her own experiences as an autistic trans woman also defy conventional categories and expectations.
It's like she's saying that she exists in a space where the usual rules don't apply, and that's not a bad thing. It's where those quantum leaps happen, those moments of breakthrough and transformation.
Exactly. It makes you wonder, where do you see those kinds of leaps happening in your own life? Those moments where things shift and new possibilities emerge.
Okay, so we've got this theme of invisibility, of being outside the norm, and then this whole idea of quantum leaps and challenging conventional systems. But there's another layer here that really intrigues me.
Okay.
Jamie's reflections on finding comfort in the edges.
Hmm.
She mentions this childhood passion for Martian football, where she played as Lurrikine's Lepton.
I was fascinated by that, too.
Yeah.
Lurrikine comes from Gaelic mythology,
Mhm.
these crafty, elusive creatures who exist between worlds.
Okay.
It's almost like a foreshadowing of Jamie's own journey of embracing her unique identity, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And then there's the lepton part, this tiny fundamental particle in physics.
Right.
It's like she's saying, even though she might feel small or overlooked, she recognizes her own inherent worth and significance. And it makes you think, how often do we underestimate the power of the seemingly small or insignificant?
All the time, I'd wager. It's a reminder that impact and value aren't always tied to size or visibility. Sometimes it's the tiniest particles, the things we might overlook that hold the most power or make the biggest difference.
I love how you put that. And speaking of those overlooked details, Jamie goes on to describe how this early experience of being Lurrikine's lepton actually foreshadowed her later embrace of being different, of finding power in the unconventional. It really makes you reflect on those formative experiences from your own childhood, doesn't it? What were some of those moments that might have shaped your path, even if you didn't fully realize it at the time?
That's a great question to ponder. And I think Jamie's journey really highlights how those early experiences, even seemingly insignificant ones, can have a profound impact on who we become. It's like planting a seed that might take years to sprout, but eventually blossoms into something truly remarkable.
What's also fascinating is how Jamie connects the lepton metaphor to her love of quantum theory, which we touched on earlier. It's like she's seeing these parallels between the scientific world and her own personal experience, finding a way to express these complex ideas through a language that resonates with her.
That's a great observation. She's clearly someone who thinks deeply about these connections,
Yeah.
finding meaning in both the scientific and the personal. And that ability to weave together seemingly disparate threads is part of what makes her work so compelling.
I couldn't agree more. It's this beautiful blend of intellect and emotion, science, and personal reflection that really draws you in. We'll be back in a bit to continue exploring Jamie's work and see where else this deep dive takes us.
Picking up where we left off, it strikes me how Jamie's background in statistics and her love for quantum theory weave together so beautifully in her writing.
Yeah.
She sees the world through this lens that combines both precise measurement and a sense of wonder and possibility. It's quite unique.
I agree. It definitely adds layers to her poetry that we might not expect. And speaking of unexpected connections, she brings up another anecdote about teaching alongside Professor Armando, this time in a geometry class.
Hmm.
Remember how she was always pushing boundaries?
Oh, absolutely. This time she was almost threatening her students with the mind-bending concepts of non-Euclidean geometry. Imagine that, introducing those ideas in a high school class.
It's like she can't resist shaking things up a bit. But what I find really interesting is that she mentions how even when her explanations seemed a bit out there, like the one about why she couldn't buy shoes at Walmart, the students really connected with them.
That speaks volumes about her ability to make complex ideas relatable, even when they challenge conventional thinking. And that ties back to her fascination with the edges, with those places where traditional knowledge breaks down. She even finds comfort in knowing that some of the most brilliant minds in history, like Newton, hit walls when dealing with the extremes of the universe.
It's like she's saying that even the most established systems have their limits.
Yeah.
She uses the example of Newton's laws and Euclidean geometry. They work perfectly fine in our everyday world, but start to crumble when you get down to the subatomic level or venture into the vastness of the cosmos. That's where quantum theory steps in, with all its probabilities, entanglements, and paradoxes.
It's a whole different way of looking at reality. And for someone like Jamie, who exists beyond the bell curve, that realm of uncertainty and possibility feels strangely familiar.
Right. Instead of fearing those edges where things get fuzzy, she embraces them. Because it's in those spaces where the familiar falls apart that new ideas and breakthroughs can emerge.
Precisely. And she even points out how people who are neurodivergent, trans, or just think differently often thrive in those spaces. They're able to see connections that others miss because they're not bound by the same assumptions and limitations.
It makes you wonder what kind of creative potential is unlocked when we embrace those who challenge the status quo. It's like she's advocating for the power of diversity, not just in terms of who we are, but also how we think.
I couldn't agree more. It's a call to value different perspectives, to see the beauty in those who don't fit neatly into predefined boxes. And speaking of not fitting in, let's revisit Jamie's reflections on her childhood passion for Martian football, particularly her role as Lurkine's lepton.
Oh, yes, that's a great example of how these themes all come together. The name itself is so rich with symbolism. You explained earlier that Lurkine comes from Gaelic mythology and represents these clever, elusive beings who exist between worlds.
Exactly. It's like a nod to her heritage, but also to her own sense of existing outside the norm, of being comfortable in those liminal spaces.
And then you have lepton, this tiny, fundamental particle in physics. It's like she's saying, even though she might feel small or insignificant in the grand scheme of things, she recognizes her own inherent worth and power.
It's such a powerful metaphor. Leptons might be tiny, but they are essential to the structure of the universe. Just like Jamie sees herself as an essential part of the fabric of existence, even if she doesn't always fit in with societal expectations.
It's a beautiful way of reframing what it means to be different, to be an outlier. Instead of seeing it as a deficit, she embraces it as a source of strength and creativity. But there's more to it than just the name itself. What really stood out to you about her reflections on this childhood experience?
What struck me most was how she described embracing the role of the outsider, the one who navigates challenges with ingenuity and resourcefulness. It's almost like playing Martian football as Laura Keene's Lepton prepared her for the challenges she would face later in life as she came to understand her own identity.
That makes a lot of sense. She was already developing those skills of resilience and adaptability early on without even realizing it. It's like she was subconsciously training for the journey ahead.
Exactly. And it makes me think about those early experiences we all have that shape who we become, often in ways we don't fully appreciate until much later.
Absolutely. Speaking of shaping experiences, Jamie also talks about being inspired by Eoin Colfer's book, The Lower Elements, with its fantastical world of fairies and hidden societies. What do you think drew her to those kinds of stories?
I think it speaks to the power of stories and metaphors to help us make sense of our own lives. For Jamie, those fantastical tales provided a way to imagine something different for herself, a world where she could fully embrace who she was, even if that world existed only in her imagination.
It's like those stories gave her permission to dream, to step outside the confines of what society deemed acceptable, and explore the full range of her identity. It makes me wonder, what books or stories had a similar impact on you, helping you to understand yourself or the world in a new way?
That's a great question to reflect on. I think for many of us, those early encounters with literature can have a profound influence on our development. They offer us glimpses into different realities, different possibilities, and help us to expand our understanding of what's possible. And in Jamie's case, those early influences seem to have played a significant role in her journey of self-discovery and creative expression.
I agree. And it's not just about the content of those stories, but also about the way they use language, metaphor, and symbolism to convey deeper meanings. It's something Jamie clearly excels at in her own poetry.
Absolutely. She weaves together personal experience, scientific curiosity, and a deep appreciation for the power of metaphor to create a truly unique and compelling voice. And it's a voice that invites us to challenge our assumptions, embrace the edges, and discover the beauty in being different.
So well said. As we move into the final part of our deep dive, I'm eager to see how these themes continue to unfold in Jamie's reflections. She's already given us so much to think about. As we delve further into Jamie's reflections, one thing that really struck me was how she talked about the 1990s. Long before she had the language to fully express her identity, she was already drawn to these symbols and metaphors that resonated with her experience.
Yeah.
Think back to the name Lipton. For her, it wasn't just this vehicle in a game, it was like this powerful metaphor waiting to be unpacked.
That's so insightful. It really speaks to that idea that our understanding of ourselves unfolds over time. Sometimes it's those early experiences, those seemingly insignificant moments that hold a deeper meaning we only grasp later on.
Exactly. And Jamie even describes how leptons, despite being incredibly small and often overlooked, are fundamental to the very structure of the universe. It's like she's drawing a parallel to her own experience of feeling invisible, yet recognizing her inherent worth. It's like those tiny particles, those leptons, mirror her own journey of finding significance and purpose.
I love that analogy. She goes on to describe how she was drawn to the idea of being small in the grand scheme of things, but still vital, moving swiftly in spaces others couldn't access. It's a powerful reminder that our impact isn't always about size or visibility, but about the unique qualities and strengths we bring to the table.
It definitely challenges that notion that bigger is always better. Sometimes it's the subtle, the unseen that truly holds the power to change things.
Absolutely. It also connects back to her reflections on Laura Keene's Lepton in Martian football. Those early experiences, even though they were just games, were shaping her understanding of her place in the world.
It's fascinating how all these seemingly disparate threads, science, mythology, personal experience, all intertwine in her work.
It's a testament to her ability to synthesize information and draw meaningful connections between these different areas of knowledge. And speaking of connections, she talks about how she embraced the role of the outsider, the one who navigates challenges with resourcefulness and ingenuity.
Right.
It's a powerful message about finding strength and resilience in being different.
I think that resonates with anyone who has ever felt like they don't quite fit in.
Absolutely. And it's not just about accepting difference, it's about celebrating it.
I completely agree. What else struck you about her exploration of identity?
The way she links her family heritage to the name Lurikeen, tracing it back to Gaelic mythology. It speaks to the importance of connecting with our roots and finding inspiration in the stories and traditions that have shaped who we are.
It adds another layer to her understanding of identity. She sees herself reflected in these ancient myths, these tales of clever, elusive beings who exist between worlds. It's almost like she's weaving together personal history and cultural heritage to create a more complete picture of herself.
Precisely. It reminds us that identity is this multifaceted thing. It's shaped by our individual experiences, our family histories, the cultural narratives we inherit, and even those symbols and metaphors that resonate with us on a deeper level.
So we've talked about science, mythology, and family history. But there's another source of inspiration that Naomi mentions, Eowyn Colfer's The Lower Elements, with its rich world of fairies and hidden societies. What do you think drew her to those kinds of stories?
I think it speaks to the power of literature to provide us with these imaginative spaces where we can explore different possibilities and envision worlds where we can be our true selves. Those fantastical tales allowed her to step outside the confines of what society deemed acceptable and connect with a different way of being.
It's like those stories gave her permission to dream, to imagine a future where she could embrace her full identity without fear or judgment.
Exactly. And it's not just about escapism. She even mentions how those seeds, planted in those imaginative worlds she clung to as a child, are finally bearing fruit in her life today. It's a beautiful testament to the enduring power of stories and the way they can shape our journeys, even years later.
It's truly inspiring. As we wrap up this deep dive into James' work, what stands out to you most about her journey?
What strikes me most is her courage. She doesn't shy away from the complexities of her identity. She embraces those challenges and celebrates the triumphs with vulnerability and authenticity. And through her poetry, she invites us to do the same, to find our own voices, to challenge those norms that limit us, and to embrace the unique tapestry of our own experiences.
Beautifully put. And for anyone listening, I encourage you to seek out James' work. Her poetry and reflections offer a powerful invitation to explore the depths of identity, the beauty of difference, and the infinite possibilities that unfold when we dare to embrace our true selves.
And remember, just like those leptons, you too hold a unique significance in the grand tapestry of the universe.
Well said. That's a perfect note to end on. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep embracing the extraordinary within yourself.